I'll do a quick roll call for the folks that are here, and then we'll get started. I'm Megan Roy, Chair of the Commission, and Elizabeth here first on my screen.
I'm Elizabeth Jennings. I am from Addison Northwest. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations there, and I'm here representing the Vermont Association of School Business Officials.
Thanks. John?
Morning, everyone. John Castle, the Executive Director for the Vermont Rural Education Collaborative.
Jennifer?
Good morning, Jennifer Deck Samuelson, Chair of the Vermont State Board of Education.
Mike?
Mike Licklider, Superintendent, Harwood Unified Union School District and representative of the Vermont Superintendents Association.
And Jeff? Sorry.
Jeff Fannin, Vermont NEA, representing Vermont NEA.
Jay?
Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association and representing that organization on this commission.
And Peter?
Peter Conlon, Chair of the House Education Committee and representing the Vermont House.
Great. Thanks, everyone. It is a state holiday, so first, thank you to our agency support folks who have popped the meeting up for us, but we are missing a few members of the commission. And also, members of the commission are aware that our guest speaker is at the last minute unable to attend. Dr. Colby, who works with the American Institutes of Research, which is an organization impacted by the pause in funding for the federal government. And so they are scheduled a last minute meeting to figure out what their next steps are. So we will still proceed with the agenda. We'll still have a discussion item on that topic. I'll talk about that when we get to that point in the agenda. It may mean that this meeting ends sooner than it is scheduled for, because we may end up being a little ahead of schedule. I have a proposal, a proposed amendment to the agenda. I'd like to propose that we have a brief discussion item about whether or not we are holding a public input session at our March 3rd meeting in Lamoille. I think I probably should get a motion. Can I have someone make a motion to add that to the end of the meeting?
I'll move.
Thanks, Jennifer. A second? Thanks, Jay. Any discussion? All those in favor of amending the agenda?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thanks. Any other amendments to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we do have a quorum, so I will ask for a motion to approve our February 3rd meeting minutes.
So moved.
Thanks, Mike. Second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Jennifer. Any discussion?
I noticed one little typo.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Which I giggled when I saw it. It's on page 2, and it's the second paragraph that begins with Bolio shared that Rebecca Samaroff, 4th line down, where it says work ahead, he is routing for everyone. I think we meant rooting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had 2 changes. That was one of them. And I thought it was, some people are saying that the administration is trying to route this commission. So I thought that was, interesting. Also on page, this one's more substantial. On page 5, where it says $2 million, it should say 200 million. And I know that because that was a statement that I made.
Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome.
I did not catch either of those. Any other amendments to the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes with edits, with the 2 edits highlighted?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. And folks who are joining us, we have an opportunity for public comment. We'll have another one at the end of the meeting. So if you are interested in providing comment to the commission, raise your hand. I see one so far. I'm going to start with David, and then others who are interested in speaking, go ahead and raise your hand. But David, you can go ahead, unmute and turn your camera on if you wish.
I'm trying to do that. Not sure I'm going to get my camera, so I'll just go ahead.
That's okay.
Thank you. The commission's credibility will always be compromised because of the narrow scope of your representation. So developing a focus on engaging with students and teachers, especially in the less affluent and urban communities, would be a really positive action toward authentic inclusion and really representing the Vermont community, the education community. And considering the changed political reality, you might consider having your outreach and engagement committee work with your engagement contractor to bring in those voices that are always left out of big political changes. Finding out what choices students and families would like to have, whether they might prefer the last 2 years of high school be spent in a workplace or a community organization or in specialized learning, or how daily schedules might be arranged to provide meaningful professional collaboration opportunities for teachers, something that's crucially missing, and without improvement, we'll never see improvement in student learning. And these are just a few of the considerations that are not part of the process right now in the commission or in the legislature. And you have the opportunity with your contractor and with a specific committee already in place to fix that. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other members of the public? Okay. And again, we'll have another opportunity at the end of the meeting. So our first agenda item is just an update from steering group. We have 2 members of the steering group here. Just sort of to summarize the conversation that they had at their last meeting, which really speaks to the agenda that we have today. I don't know if either Peter or Jennifer want to summarize.
Well,
Thank you, Jennifer. I lost my notebook with all my notes in it about our last meeting.
Well, and I was going to say, Megan, you had sent an email to the commission on Thursday, which I think summarized it pretty well. But basically, we sort of had a high-level discussion about where we are with our work and whether our work at this point is to come up with a new proposal or whether it's to react to the agency's proposal, agency governor's proposal, or do something different. And we had a good conversation and decided that realistically we don't have time to put up a different proposal for the legislature's consideration given the timing. But we thought what would be helpful is to really keep our focus on the high level, the 3 prongs that we've established as the guiding principles for our work, which is governance, funding, and quality and sustainability. And so we're going to keep the focus sort of at that higher level and think about, maybe questions that we could ask or considerations for the legislature, and then have sort of regular reports back to the General Assembly about the work of the commission. And we also talked about submitting a proposed revised work plan or scope of work to the General Assembly for them to approve, given that we feel that the scope as it currently exists in the Act is probably broader than what it needs to be, and given the timing that we have and the work that we can do, would allow us to sort of concentrate our work where it might be most helpful. And then the final thing is to allow the Communication and Engagement Committee to work with our consultant to meet with some of those groups that had been identified in the Act and come up with a plan for how they're going to satisfy their charge of communication and engagement. And I don't know if I forgot anything, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Zoe. I would add actually, Jay, go ahead. And then I was going to add You go ahead. Maybe your question is what I was going to add, but go ahead.
Probably not. I just wanted to, I know a lot of us have dual roles on here. I know that Peter's on the steering committee, but the part about how the General Assembly wants to, which Jennifer, I agree with everything you said. The part about the General Assembly and how they would interact with the commission, is that in line with what you folks are talking about in House Ed and what you heard in the Senate, Representative Conlon?
The discussion in House Ed has not reached the point of saying, well, what about the Commission on the Future of Public Education yet? We've been sort of inundated with a lot of input from the administration and other things. Many of us are sort of talking about it informally, and you know, I think it'll probably be more of this commission will, the commission's input to the legislature will be vital in helping us decide what it should be doing from here on out. Frankly, we're all in a little bit of a spin in terms of what we all should be doing next as next steps. So don't feel like the commission is in any different a position than many of the rest of us.
Thanks, Peter. And what I was going to add to the summary is the steering group kicked off its conversation with sort of are we reacting to proposals on the table, meaning the administration's proposal, or are we engaging in our own process? And I think the steering group is trying to figure out a way to do both. Because right now, in order to be relevant, there needs to be some reaction, and two of the components of the administration's proposal are part of our original charge. But also, the commission's job is to entertain other proposals, to make potentially recommendations. I don't think the steering group is suggesting that we will not make recommendations. However, we are trying to thread that needle. And so the desire to say we've already identified governance, funding, and quality as 3 areas, those still make sense. And if we address and guide and organize our work around those areas, which is sort of part of our original thought, it allows us to do both. It allows us to react to what's putting on the table. It allows us to propose questions, considerations, and possibly other ideas within the context of those things. So I just wanted to have a little bit of clarification. And then I would just elevate and affirm what Peter said. It is challenging to do that and feel useful as a commission because of the speed at which the legislature is moving. And so the steering group's thought was that absent of them telling us something, it may help them if we make a recommendation to them. So one of our agenda items today is to discuss, if we were to say to the legislature, here's how we think you should use us, what would that look like? I think that's the goal. John.
Was the administration part of the steering committee discussion?
They were, yes, I believe.
Okay. Just
Zoe was present at that meeting, yes.
They're absent today. Okay.
I'm trying to remember, John, off the top of my head, if Rebecca was at the steering committee meeting, someone can probably help me with that. I honestly don't remember, but yes, Zoe was part of that. And today, my understanding is, so some folks are traveling because it's a state holiday. That's my understanding of today's meeting.
Megan, yes, I would agree with that people are traveling, and I'm looking at the minutes from our steering group meeting on February 17th, and Rebecca was there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, I'll move us on. So our discussion item operating under what we just talked about, what the steering group is recommending, this would be the funding pillar, for lack of a better word, the funding part of our work. And we had asked, this is based on our last full commission meeting, with folks thinking that it would be helpful to at least hear some additional perspective other than the agency's perspective around foundation formula, Dr. Colby had done some presentations to the legislature. She was scheduled to come in and join us today to sort of expand on that. She is, as I shared, unfortunately not able to join. However, the overview portion of her, what she was going to share with us is related to the testimony she already provided, which the committee has, at least if I assume that folks had a chance to view it. I think right after she had delivered that testimony, we had shared the links out to the commission. So what I would like to do is just go around and have each member of the commission either in saying this, I'm assuming that folks looked at the testimony. So I understand that if you haven't, or if you don't feel like you can speak to it, you certainly can pass. But the goal is, this was a conversation about foundation formula considerations. What is important to understand if there is going to be a consideration of moving to a foundation formula? That was the premise of the discussion. We won't have Tammy be able to provide an overview, so I'm just going to ask, either folks can raise their hand or I'll just call on each member. Initial impressions, questions or considerations that they would be asking Dr. Colby, because she did say that she'd be able to get back to us. Anybody want to go first? Jay, I see your hand first.
Only to get the ball started. I was typing a
Thank
couple of
you.
notes. I reserve the right to get to speak again if I have to go
Perfect.
first. Okay. So this is off the top of my head because I really want to put some thought. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've mentioned the 200 million or 180 million several times. I'm really struggling with seeing how we make cuts to that level. Having talked to a couple superintendents and principals in the last 4 or 5 days, I'm looking at places like CVU. You know, when they take this model and lay it on their current system, they're looking at over $20 million worth of cuts. And the same thing is true for Essex Westford, and I think maybe South Burlington. Now, those are 3 districts that do have, wealth in their communities and have traditionally been high spenders, but they also are already at the scale that we're talking about, or closer than most places at the scale we're talking about. So I'm having a real tough time seeing how making cuts like that to programs in those schools that already have pretty big class sizes, and I don't see how that's not going to happen with the level of cuts we're talking about. I don't think you can make that level of cuts without hurting kids unless you do something with governance first. And I've said this in the legislature, and I'll continue to say this. I think you have to make the governance changes that allow for changes to scale, whatever that might be, whether it's closing schools, combining classrooms, whatever it might be, before you're really going to be able to get the financial savings that you're talking about here. To simply cut almost $200 million out of the system and lay a foundation formula on top of what's already there, and a foundation formula that clearly does not cover what is currently being spending in ed spending, because they're saying there's $180 million in spending. I think kids are going to get hurt. I think it's going to be a shock to the system and hugely disruptive. And that's just the funding part. I can talk a lot more about 5 districts too if we get to that point.
Thanks, Jay. Jeff.
Yeah, I in large, I agree with what Jay said. The $184 million cut is just that, a cut. And I listened to Tammy in Ways and Means on Friday. She was very good. And that's worthy of a watch and listen for those who didn't catch it. But the amount needs to be sorted out. And we have the APA consultants from Colorado who are saying that's the right number, the 13.2 plus weights, and Tammy saying it's 15.5. That's the delta that we need to figure out. And I think Jay's point is a very valid one. Vermonters across the state have voted in budgets, maybe sometimes reluctantly, maybe in difficult ways, but they have voted what they've voted to spend. And to have the state come in and say, no, we're not going to let you spend what you voted, I think is troublesome, really, and fairly undemocratic. So I'll say I have concerns with the amount, and I also have concerns about the inflator that's got to have real, genuine inflator factor to it. And if the state does not put in what it's asked to put in, it should not and cannot be taken out on kids and programs. It's not their fault that the state didn't vote for what it said it would do. So I think there's some real concerns with it. Now, as a concept, foundation formulas can work. But Jay's right. There may be some other structural changes that need to come alongside that. So interesting conversation, certainly.
Thanks, Jeff. Mike?
And I would agree with what was just stated. One of the questions I have, they can work. Foundation formulas can work. I think there's merit to further exploring it for the commission. The underlying assumptions of the administration's proposal is what concerns me, especially when hearing how Dr. Colby talked about the triangulation in different ways to get to those numbers. What I can share with you, just as a superintendent from a district that is a higher spending district with about 1,600 K through 12 students, so we're not quite at that scale that that was referenced by Jay with the 16 or with the higher range, 3,000 to 4,000. But what I can share is for this year's budget, in order to get in at a 2% increase in ed spending, we've already cut $2.4 million. The proposal would assume another approximately $6.4 million in cuts, which would mean closure of buildings. Our board is exploring what that would look like, but we're in a situation where we don't have capacity in those buildings without getting into the construction piece of this. So it is a complicated situation that really involves more discussion and more of a deep dive than I think what has been done so far.
Thanks, Mike. Jennifer, and then I put myself in the queue.
Thanks. So, couple of comments. I also watched Tammy's testimony to House Ways and Means, which I thought was really, really helpful. And one of the things, and I'm going to mangle this because this is not my field, so I'm going to try my best here, and I can't find my notes on the spot. But there were 3 different ways to get a foundation formula, and the evidence-based model is one of those 3, and that's the model that the administration has gone with. Tammy also talked about, and I think this explains the discrepancy between the 13.2 and the 15.5, but again, I'm going to lose the details here. But conceptually, I think her number is based on a different model. And my understanding is her model kind of takes what Vermont currently is doing. And so it uses the data points as they currently exist to come up with the model, the funding formula that way, as opposed to what I understand the evidence-based model is doing is starting with a hypothetical, this is where we think things should be, and then retrofitting the dollar amount and the data to kind of get to that model. And so it's really, my understanding is that the difference is, the funding formula is based on, are you starting with the ideal, or are you starting with where we are? And then I think what she was saying is that the formula, based on what you start as the foundation, then the weights end up having different amounts, but it kind of ends up in the same place. But I guess my point is, I would love to know why the administration is going with the ideal, the evidence-based model, which isn't necessarily based in the reality of where we are right now. And I think, I'm not sure how realistic that is. I mean, that's a question for me that I would love some clarity on. And then the second thing that I would say, as a reaction is I notice, one of the things that Zoe has mentioned is that this $180 million savings is predicated upon the model that is being suggested. So, the 5-district model, the average class size of, 15 to 1 K to 3, 25 to 1, 4 to 12. I think there's a lot of discomfort with both of those things. And it makes me wonder, if the ultimate decision is to have more than 5 districts, like let's say we have 15 districts or 20, whatever the number is, I don't know, it will lessen that $180 million projected savings. If we decrease the student to teacher ratio, that will also decrease this $180 million savings. So like right now, the funding formula that's being presented really results in a slightly less than 8% savings on the tax rate. if you start tweaking with that formula, the resultant tax savings will be even less. And I think, again, the open question that I personally, and this is not, State Board of Ed, but this is my personal question, is we're really upending our educational system. And I think the lower the tax savings, the more critically I think we really need to think about, if what we're doing is really leading to the results that we want. And I think tax savings was maybe one goal. I think there are other goals as well, but viewed through the lens of tax savings, I'm not sure we're going to end up with a 5-district model and the student teacher ratios that have been identified. So presumably we would have less tax savings as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I've been thinking about this from the perspective, not as chair, but as I'm here as someone involved with Act 173. So when I think about adequacy, I'm thinking about, are we funding schools appropriately to be able to deliver on the legislation that exists in Vermont? And specific to Tammy's multiple presentations, which are, I agree, very helpful. The question about a foundation formula in every piece of research is the base sufficient? That's the core question. The concept of saying, here's the amount that we need to fund schools, and then applying that from the state down, it's all about whether or not it's the right amount. And what I understood from Tammy, and several of you have pointed that out, is the administration's proposal uses one methodology. There are 3, and the most successful states who have looked at this triangulate those 3 methods. The other 3 methods are professional judgment panels, and sometimes those take a long time to be able to unpack it. So the evidence-based model, which is what the administration's proposal is grounded in, is then triangulated by professional judgment panels and also education cost functions. And the details, similar to you, Jennifer, I'm not an expert in that area, but what it tells me is that there is much more involved with just developing your base. So for me, before we decide if this is a good idea, and it might be, right? But before we decide if this is a good idea, we need to use all 3 of those methodologies in developing our proposed base amount. Once there is a base amount, someone else said this, I think it might have been you, Jay, actually Jeff as well, there needs to be a projection for inflation. So one of the things that Dr. Colby talks about is that when states don't put in a mechanism to make sure that amount increases with inflation, then it is subject to political whims in the future. And that is where it becomes problematic. And we need to model the impact on districts all across the system. And I would argue we need to model on our current system, which is what several folks have said. I would elevate the example that Jay gave. I would even say it a little bit differently. Those districts that he mentioned are actually operating at scale, and several of them, at least ones that I have experience with, actually spend less than the statewide average. And that is partially because of scale. And I think that's important. Are we punishing districts that have achieved scale? I think that's something that needs to be modeled and understood. Then all of that is before we decide if this is a good idea. Then, if it is a good idea, there needs to be a meaningful transition because there will be reductions in the system. And I would also offer that there needs to be a standing committee that exists to be able to review the funding formula on an ongoing basis. So again, for me, those are all centered on this might be a good idea. This might be an idea that has merit. It has not yet been sufficiently investigated from my perspective. I think Elizabeth and then John.
So I haven't heard one single thing yet that I disagree with at all from anyone in this group. I just want to say that, like, I agree with everything I've heard. But my addition to it is I think about the legislation that was passed last year, and then in regards to the weighting system being changed and the counting for pupils in school districts, and that all changing. The goal of all of that change was basically to make education more equitable amongst school districts in the whole state. And so I think that was the goal. I don't know how much that was actually realized when that change was made. So my biggest concern with changing the whole formula is we're no longer just taking the system we have and trying to tweak it to make it, result in what is the end result goal for our school districts. Now we're going to change the whole thing, and we don't really have a really great way to see whether or not that's going to meet the goals at the end or not either, because it hasn't been put into place. I do agree that if we are going to do that, we would want to model out all three options at a foundation formula. One thing I've been hearing from some folks is when they think about the option that results in the 15.5 instead of the 13.2, is that at the end of the day, that actually may end up costing the state more money in the ed fund if you apply it to all of the districts as they are now. And then, so I also agree with Jay that without dealing with the governance structure first in some way and finding some kind of more efficient way to operate, I think that that would be challenging to actually save any money, even if we're changing the whole foundation formula. Without actually cutting programs and teachers and things that are already really important for students. And the last thing I would say is a lot of our commission work in our chart was also talking about cost drivers, and dealing with both the funding formula and the governance structure doesn't touch upon any of those cost drivers. So it's like cutting the system with money and changing the structure in a drastic way. If that's what, at least the governor's proposal is a drastic change. I think governance structure, consolidating by county or something like that would be less drastic, but, basically making those huge changes. And at the end of the day, you haven't dealt with any of the cost drivers. I'm not really sure how that's going to save money and fix what it is we're trying to fix.
Thanks, Elizabeth. John?
In some ways, I feel like it's hard to have this conversation on the funding issue, irrespective of the larger issue, right? In terms of, governance, as I think many people have indicated, but also in terms of our work as a commission. And I have to say, I feel like I'm getting increasingly frustrated with the administration and the rollout of the proposal. Of course, some of it I understand was probably strategic, only roll out certain pieces of it to try to gain some traction before providing details that may be more contentious or controversial. But we've also seen the reality is that many of the components of the proposal are not thought through. And I would, say that essentially the administration's a little too far out over their skis, and they're trying to play catch up and trying to figure things out. And I think the sooner we as a commission essentially reject the proposal of the governor, just outright the whole thing, done, gone, and encourage the legislature to do the same thing and start over, we have wasted more than a month because we're all trying to respond to the governor's proposal that is not fully thought out. And I think, again, the foundation formula is one example of that. And, it's so funny listening to all of this testimony, but listening to, I think it was on Thursday in Ways and Means, trying to explain the state guarantee, right? This is the additional funding above the base amount and the weighting, and how much simpler, right, this is going to be than our current system. And it's just, if that's the driving focus, and when you have members of the Ways and Means Committee scratching their head trying to figure out how is this more simple, right, than what we currently have for a funding system. And so I really feel that what we're dealing with right now is very flawed. I think it's very problematic. Yes, we should be looking at different funding formulas and different considerations, but what we're forced to respond to becomes spinning our wheels as opposed to digging into things that I think are more constructive. So I know that's just sort of a bigger picture of my concerns. And I do think I have other, later on in the conversation, if we dig in more on the foundation formula, I can share some additional reservations.
Thanks, John. I'm just going to keep going through the queue because now we're cycling back through. Peter, if you want to throw your name in, feel free. I won't but otherwise I'm gonna keep us going. Jay.
Yeah, thanks for the second bite at the apple here. Also, there, there's no mention of school construction by the administration at all. And we have failing infrastructure. And the administration has put forth no plan for rectifying that. And one of the things that I know my members believe, and I think the other organizations believe, is that that has to be part of this. We can't do a major educational transformation without addressing the basic infrastructure needs of our buildings. That needs to be part of any master plan to transform education. And along with that, I've heard very little about improving quality of education for kids. I've really seen nothing on that. I've heard the agency say they are focused on that, but I don't see how not changing anything else and giving schools less is going to improve educational opportunities for kids. I don't see that. Instruction effectiveness and research on student achievement is stuff that I really spend a lot of time with. I believe strongly in it. I don't see anything that suggests that that's going to make test results, even though they're only one small measure, better, graduation rates better, anything along those lines. And lastly, I echo Elizabeth's point about not addressing cost drivers. This to me looks like an opportunity to try to gut the system, to force small schools to close, to force some drastic changes to public education, and maybe even move more towards like a school choice environment. And if that's the case, I don't think that's good for the majority of kids. And I'm a little bit with John now at the point where I'm ready to say we should just completely reject this proposal, put forth a new proposal that's that addresses the needs that are out there, and they are complex, and it's not going to be a simple fix, but there are certainly steps we can take right now that will improve educational quality, can improve educational funding, can improve educational infrastructure, and can save the taxpayers some dollars in the short term, a little bit, and hopefully put us in a more sustainable position moving forward in terms of education finance.
Thanks, Jay. Jennifer?
Thank you. So two things. I just want to sort of tack on to my prior comment about, speaking, I was speaking as a, my own person and not on behalf of the board. I wanted to point out that the board has opined on the proposal, and we testified before House Ed, I think a week and a half ago. So the board held, Tammy and I were invited in on behalf of the State Board of Education to testify before House Ed about the board's response to the proposal. So we had a special meeting on February 3rd where, kind of like today, what we're doing, where, we went around and we took board member comments, and then I compiled those, and then we testified to House Ed. So if anyone's interested, I know it's online, but I'm just wanted to point that out because I'm happy to share that out. And I can say that the board's next meeting will be this Wednesday, and we do have on the agenda to talk about the governance aspect of the proposal. And again, my thought is that I'm going to compile board member comments, and then if we're invited, we'll be ready to be able to share those out to House Ed or Senate Ed, whatever. And to that end, my second question was, what is the end point of the conversation that we're having right now? Are we going to be submitting a list of questions, comments, concerns to the General Assembly? Or, now I've heard a couple of people say, maybe taking a vote up or down on the proposal, but I'm just kind of curious, where is this conversation going? So I'm just curious. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. I put myself in the queue to respond, to kind of expand on sort of an expertise part of it that Jay brought up. I did just want to say, I think once we have sort of surfaced our reactions to, then I do think we need to come back to that very question, Jennifer. What are we doing? I can talk about what the steering group had sort of thought would be useful, but I think it is worth a discussion to say, are we taking a position? So I'll come back to that. What I wanted to add on, Jay talked about quality, and quality is one of our 3 guiding principles as a commission. And I wanted to connect it to one of the reasons I think if you are considering a foundation formula, you need to triangulate the methodologies, is because the evidence cited in the evidence base that has been used in this proposal. Because I've done a pretty, there's more to it, I would say, but I've done a little bit of a dive into the works cited of the report, the PICUS report. It is largely driven by research that does not necessarily look at instructional practices. So there's a lot of research on district comparisons, districts who use the model, not a lot on what does it actually take to deliver good instruction to students. That is, to me, why you also need to triangulate that with other data. And the expert panels, to me, is how you dig into that. I have big concerns about implementation of multi-tiered systems of support, which, by the way, when you don't have a strong system of support, you tend to have higher special education costs because you put more pressure on that part of the system when you can't meet the needs of kids before they struggle significantly. So I just wanted to connect those two dots and agree with what Jay said. There are ways to make sure that you are ensuring quality and, in fact, expanding quality. Elizabeth pointed out that if we did this right, we might resource some schools better in a way that is better for kids. So I just wanted to connect those dots. So let's keep going through with the reaction. I will come back to that question of where do we want to go from here. Mike and then Elizabeth.
Well, and I'll kind of come back to what I would hope to see us do moving forward. But one of the challenges I'm having is I'm trying to keep up, and I have a lot of respect for our legislators on this panel, because I don't know how you keep everything straight at this point. There are so many different proposals coming out, which raise questions. I watched Ways and Means on Friday when Tax Department was talking about the state guarantee and how some communities would be able to raise taxes to that state guarantee, and that money would be spread out. There's just so many areas of questions I have. I think John or someone mentioned school choice. At a time when we're seeing a natural decline in enrollment in our public schools, and we're trying to build a better system, I have concern with taking even more students out of that system and having that enrollment decline even more. What I was thinking we were doing in the fall is we had established our principles. We were starting to dive into each of the areas, do additional research. What I envisioned that we were going to do is come up with a roadmap, an overall vision, and then a roadmap to help get us there. That's a logical, sequenced series of events related to different aspects, whether it's educational quality, funding, scale and size of districts, but there has to be a natural progression and a logical progression to examine those issues. I think any one of these issues that we're discussing would be challenging for a full-time legislature to tackle, let alone the citizen legislature that we have that meets for 5-6 months. So I think we need to give some thought into what that roadmap, that blueprint looks like, and what are the most important items for us to recommend as a commission as first steps.
Thanks, Mike. Elizabeth?
Okay, I wrote down a ton of notes about different things folks are saying. So to start with what Jay and John were talking about and the idea of rejecting the governor's proposal, coming up with our own, that kind of concept. My thought on that as I was listening to folks was, if that is something that we end up doing, I think it's important to think about the governance structure during that timeline, because obviously coming up with our own proposal and actually having something affect legislation this year is challenging just because of sheer timing, right? So that wouldn't be something that we would have solidified and approved and all the way through its planning process this year. No more than the governor's plan would be easily doable this year or in the timeline that they've proposed. But I'm thinking about, as we move through any of those decisions, my recommendation of I've talked about this on a few different meetings that we've had. I think Peter was part of one of those meetings where basically what I don't understand if we're looking at governance structure changes is how come there's still supervisory unions in the state? How come those have not been consolidated into school districts, to become more efficient? Because that's one step in the direction of having that efficiency. So disallowing supervisory unions to continue and having them transition towards school district. Whenever a superintendency is vacant, it's my understanding that someone at some level in the state has the ability to take a look at that. Not necessarily that they would say, no, you can't advertise for a new superintendent, but they might, and they have that option. So looking logistically at where is that district? Where is it in relation to other districts? Could they feasibly consolidate with another close by, or, you know, make a countywide decision to become a district? So really taking a look at that and maybe forcing some mergers based on that. And then the third thing is not allowing any more school districts to break out on their own. You know, basically we've had the Lincolns of the world that have been able to separate from a school district. And now they're this tiny little school district in the middle of nowhere that has to tuition all their high school students to somewhere else. And that costs a lot of money. That is in no way efficient for the state of Vermont to be operating like that. So that's my thought on that. So basically kind of during any transition of government structure, just kind of having the state really think about how they're aligning school districts during that time. And then I think it was Mike was talking about, you know, alignment of, I think it's more in lines with delivery of education. So everybody does it a little bit differently. I mean, there are groups of us that are kind of following the same thing when we're talking about, Megan was talking about the MTSS system. I think that's all important. But if you're thinking about in that large scale of consolidating school districts, if you're all delivering education in a different way, you have to align that first before you, I mean, you can't become one school district and all be doing education delivery in a very different way. I don't know how that would work. So it's like the cart being put before the horse. You have to kind of come into alignment in some way, in some agreement, before you consolidate the governance structure. And I had one more idea, and this is based on something I heard when they were presenting the governor's proposal and talking about better quality education for students. They said something to the effect that all students in Vermont deserve to have access to highly qualified teachers. And so they were talking in the general form of salary increases and getting salaries aligned so that teachers are being paid well, to be able to maintain teachers and keep them. How do you do that if you're cutting all the funding? You know, how is it that we're going to cut funding, but we are going to increase salaries as a whole? That just, the concept just doesn't make sense. It's like saying one thing on one side and actually doing something completely the opposite.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Peter.
Thanks. I didn't want to be obviously silent during all of this, but just to let everybody know, I've been sitting here scribbling notes. The feedback is great. It's also really reflective of a lot of sort of the questions we all have as well in the legislature, including the amount of time we have spent awaiting the details of the proposal, which I will just say, as of this morning, we still don't actually have a bill, much less language to look at. So I just, you know, I do want everybody to know that, and a lot of the sort of concerns that you have all brought up, we also have as well. But I do think, and depending on what Megan sort of suggests for a path forward, you know, I think you are all raising concerns and questions that are important for us to have, perhaps from the commission. You know, I think as this commission is sort of feeling like our timing is getting challenging, we are as well. I think we have probably this coming week is the week where we have to start making some hard choices about how are we moving forward and what are we moving forward with. So again, this has just been helpful to hear. A number of you have sort of brought up MTSS and special education. I would just bring that up as a very big cost driver, and one that we had hoped Act 173 was going to help tackle. And it was interesting, on Friday, we had Nate Levinson testifying. Actually, he was testifying on behalf of AOE as one of their consultants coming up with this design. But I did ask him about the fact that Act 173's implementation has been uneven at best, and here we are 5 years later, probably no, 7 years later. And his response was essentially the reason that it has not been fully implemented is that for a change like that, you need to have an agency that is all in and supporting districts and implementing it and really leading the charge over a steady 5-year period in order to make that happen. And so I can't help myself, and I'm speaking just for myself, ask, okay, if that's just one small part of all of the things we need to address, and we haven't even done that to the level that we need to, it makes me wonder what is our capacity to implement gigantic change and sweeping change as being proposed. Also sort of wonder, like, there are enough people with the expertise out there to even sort of write the regulations and rules and everything and create these districts to make it happen. There's lots of tiny little on the ground logistics that I think about all the time, and there's a lot of those that need to be answered as well. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. John, go ahead, and then I will make an attempt to see where we go next.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback a little bit of what Peter's saying is that I think you're spot on, Peter, that when we think about the capacity of the agency, they don't have the ability to support the field. And there's really, great people in the agency. And this is not a disappointment in those rank and file folks that are doing good work in their various divisions. But the agency has been understaffed and without the level of capacity that it's really needed to serve the field for many, many years. And, it's essentially turned into the agency of compliance as opposed to the agency of education. And I think, 173 is a great example. That's no small thing. That is a very big thing. And without the resources for implementation and supporting the field, it's a patchwork at best. And I think, we could probably all cite multiple examples. And, I'm glad to actually hear the governor suggesting, I don't know, it was $4 or $5 million he's suggesting in his budget to go to the agency. Of course, nobody knows what that's for, right? Is that for improved capacity? Is it for compliance? I know part of our charge is to be also looking at the agency itself, right? And making recommendations about its delivery and its staffing. And I think that's an area that I think we should keep high on our list in our work in terms of impacting the future of our system. And I get very frustrated when the system is denigrated, when the system is also the agency, right? They are part of the delivery model in this state. And until we invest in a higher capacity, they're not going to have the ability. And I'm particularly worried at this point that people are marshaling all of their resources to advance a political agenda without spending their time focusing on the field. And I think these are real issues that have to be recognized. We have to shine a light on these things because it really goes to, I think, the quality issue, right? If we're going to have quality outcomes for students, yes, funding is an issue, governance is an issue, but when we think about, workforce development, the level of investment has really been too limited in terms of workforce investment. And if we're going to have quality outcomes for students, we need to have quality educators in the classroom. So, whether it's facilities investments, whether it's, workforce investment, none of those things are also part of this agenda or this proposal. Yes, we need to look at cost containment. We do need to look at cost drivers. We need to look at tax relief, but we also need to look at investments at the same time. And what we get are these platitudes towards we're going to solve everything, right, by reducing things by almost $200 million. And it's just not true, right? We're being sold something that is about a different agenda. It's about dismantling our public education system as we know it. We can't afford that, right? Yes, we can't afford to spend what we're spending, but we can't afford dismantling our public education system.
Thanks, John. Jeff?
So I didn't come to this meeting thinking we should do what I think John and some others may have suggested earlier, which is rejecting the proposal, the governor's proposal, and suggesting a different route, routing or routing. But I think I'm there, and I think that John, you just said it really well. We don't have an AOE anymore that is robust. I do remember, I'm old at this point, and I do remember in the early 2000s being in Senate Education and watching these special ed teams from the AOE come through, and they had gone through and worked with 10 different schools and worked with those schools to ensure that their special ed offerings and practices were as recommended. And we don't do that anymore. That's gone in large measure. And that's an example of the AOE being hollowed out. And you're right, John, they are part of the system today. And yet we're not supporting them enough or giving them enough resources with which to support schools. So I think giving them more, dynamic control and system control at this point is really catastrophically not wise. And I think that we need to branch out in a different direction. We could take bits and pieces perhaps from their proposal and incorporate them into something we think is recommended. But I think lock, stock, and barrel taking their proposal and running with it is not advisable. And I know, Peter, your committee and other committees in the State House have struggled with the slow rollout of details. And that is, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but I know drafting a bill of this magnitude would have taken weeks, if not months. And I know that there are some people perhaps working on it, but what I've heard is that there's going to be a short form bill coming out soon. But, a sentence or two is not going to cut it. So I think we need to cut our losses, if you will, as a commission and start pressing ahead in our own way.
Jay, go ahead, and then I'm gonna see where we are.
I'm only speaking again because of the comments about the AOE, and you've all heard me say this for almost, 20 years now. When you have an agency of education that is an arm of the governor and you have a 2-year governor term, I don't think it's a good model. I don't think it's a neutral model. And I think we're seeing the effects of that. I have always supported, I testified against having an agency of education. I think a Department of Education with an independent state board that oversees the Department of Education is a much better model for a public education, especially in a state with a 2-year governor term. And I think part of the reason the AOE is where it is today is because it has largely been turned into a compliance organization. I can remember picking up the phone 20 years ago and actually talking to an AOE lawyer. And now the people that I've been worked with there in my job now are perfect. I'm talking about back when I was a principal and a superintendent. Like right now, if I pick up the phone and call Emily Simmons, she's going to respond immediately. She's great. I'm not knocking any individual people. There's just not enough of them. There's not enough expertise. If I'm an expert, if I need special ed help, the person in charge of special education there is a person who's just a teacher. That's not that person's fault, but they have no special ed administration experience. And that's true throughout. There's no team of science teachers that can come to a school, former science teachers, and help you like there used to be. It used to be common for school improvement teams to have AOE people come and sit with you and help you through the process. That doesn't happen anymore. And that is a concern.
Thanks, Jay. First, I want to parking lot and pick it back up. This question about whether or not the commission is desiring to take action about wholesale support or lack of support of the administration's plan. So I just want to, it's related to what I'm going to say next. So for me, as your chair, what has been incredibly challenging about this process, many things, but what Mike shared a few minutes ago about his thought of what we were all here to do is exactly what I thought we were all here to do, which is to analyze the issues. We developed a set of guiding principles. And frankly, that concept of how we were going to do our work has been circumvented by this plan. And even though there have been pieces of the plan shared with us, I have heard the administration say frequently, well, it shouldn't be a surprise. And no, maybe the concepts behind it are not a surprise, but the commission was never used and could have been used to be able to unpack this. And so we are all thrown off. I could wrap my head around going back to exactly what Mike just said. taking our three guiding principles. I do still think that these three areas, governance, funding, and quality, I do think those are the right things. I do still firmly myself as an individual, I do think we need changes in all those areas. I do not think we need the changes that are articulated right now. I could suggest that this commission steer itself back into what it thought, but I hesitate to do that if the legislature, and this is not the fault of the legislature, but if the legislature isn't going to say, yes, we want you to do that work, commission, and turn around a recommendation for us, and we are going to wait until you do, and then I don't know that it's helpful for us to do it. And so each of these sort of, let's try to surface the issues and feed them through to the legislature, have been done in an attempt to not waste our time, because it would be really frustrating to dive back into what Mike is talking about and make our own recommendations if it's not going to be utilized. But I think just today's conversation about just a component, and I agree with everyone who says the components are intersected. They absolutely do. We're only organizing them this way to try to organize a conversation. Even just today's conversation signals that in order to do this well, it will take time. And we need to know, I think, if we are being given the time as a commission or not. And that is the piece that I have been struggling with. I also would just come, and let me finish one more thing. This is kind of to Jennifer's, and so to what end? The steering group did talk about the idea of being able to release on a more regular basis. I'm using the term policy brief or issue brief. That's not the right term, because actually it would require a lot more research to really call it a brief, but absent of a better way to articulate it, that one of the outcomes of these types of conversations could be a more quickly turned around item that goes to the legislature that says, here are all the things your commission thinks about this one piece. And it would be at least an attempt to keep pace with what they were doing. So that was the thought coming into organizing the conversation this way. Even as we talk, I'm sort of taking my own notes about, okay, what would I turn around to the legislature this week if they were inviting us in? All of that is to say, I would offer, although I do have a suggestion about whether or not it makes sense to do it today when we have quite a few members missing. Any member of the commission could put a motion on the table to have a voted reaction to the administration's plan. As I said, I've been and I would welcome folks to say, Megan, I don't like the way you're organizing this, because I'm trying to make us relevant. And we may be at the point where there is a stronger, coalesced perspective around something. And that might be useful, regardless of what that answer is to, are we generating an alternative plan? Or is the legislature down the path of developing an alternative plan? And therefore we shouldn't, I don't want to say waste our time, but because it's not a waste of time. I think most of us are here because this is really important. And I know I'm here now because I'm really worried about where it's going. But so I don't mean to imply wasted time, because it's not really about our time, but it sort of is. That was a very poor attempt. That was actually probably a non-productive way of pulling us together. John.
Megan, I appreciate your reflections and your comments, and I know how much you've put into this and how much you care about it. I think we all do. And, I want to be very clear, and I understand, the administration is not on the call right now, but I think, many of you know me well enough. I wouldn't have measured my words any differently. I would have said the same thing, and happy to have this conversation with the secretary and whomever, the governor directly. That doesn't matter to me. And so I think we've really struggled since the governor's proposal has come out to try to find our footing. It's recognizable. I think we recognize the pace of things in the legislature are moving at a much faster rate in which we move. And we were designed to look long term, right? And to propose a recommendation by next October. I think our work is still incredibly important. I think there is so much to pull apart and continue to discuss. I think we do provide a forum for the state, right? There are obviously people on this call today that are listening in that care about this issue. There are people that use this forum for public comment. I think we do have the potential to engage in truly authentic community engagement and communication that I think is really important. And I think we, want to roll up our sleeves and get to that work. I think, again, I'll just say, there's so much to unpack with the governor's proposal. And I haven't even let loose on, this idea of a 5-district model. Come on, folks. That is just like the stupidest thing. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be really blunt. It makes no sense. None. Why are we wasting any time? And when we model things, we're modeling it based on that. That doesn't make any sense. And it's all smoke and mirrors and sleight of hand, right? So I truly believe the sooner that we can say, this doesn't make sense, the totality of this proposal is a dismantling of public education, we are going to reject that and then start building forward, right? There are many things we need to tackle. And the legislature, God help you guys, Peter, you've got so much work to do in a short window of time. And we want to be constructive in giving you feedback and information. And we certainly know member organizations are already formulating alternative, suggestions and ideas for policy considerations, some of which we will agree with, some of it we may not. But I think the sooner that we say, no, we're going to move forward and do our work and not be held hostage, right, with responding to the governor's proposal and not be co-opted, right, as an organization to do the bidding of the governor's proposal, I think the better.
Thanks, John. Peter?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for all the comments. First, just quickly to John's comments. There's nothing in the commission's charge that says it's charged with reacting to the governor's plan. We can move ahead with just, frankly, what, John, you're suggesting, if that's the desire. Again, there's no charge that says we have to vote up or down on any plan that's in front of us. I just want to say that the struggle we just heard in Megan's statement is we're having the same one. We, at least in the House Education Committee, value this commission. We believe that the right people are at the table to really discuss these big issues. Again, it was formed before really Zoe was on board and the Listen and Learn tour was underway and all of that. It was created in the absence of all of that. Which is to say, we are also saying, how can the commission be effective while the pace of things is different? We are meeting every day for 8 hours a day. We have many of you in to speak to us about much of what we're hearing. So, in my own mind, I flirted with the idea, well, do we hit pause on the commission? And then just sort of like, once a path forward seems much more secure, that it sort of then restarts with a more robust schedule. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. But again, just to say, we believe in the work here. We believe the right people are at the table. We just need your help in how to be most effective. I would also like to say that I believe we will rework the language of the commission's charge, in part to sort of do our best to pull back that October deadline, and try to do a different charge so that the work can continue right up to the beginning of the next session. And I would just also say we are in a 2-year biennium, so not everything is going to be implemented anyway in the first half of the biennium. Again, just like Megan said, I'm not sure if my comments are moving us forward or backwards. And anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Mike, and then Jeff.
I think both John and Peter's comments are moving us forward, and that's why I was going to say that I think the next meeting, rather than take votes and react to what's on the table, we need to continue on with our charge and double down on that and make sure that we're providing that vision for the future of public education in Vermont that we were originally charged with almost a year ago now. And we don't have a lot of time left. I would appreciate if the legislature would consider changing that October deadline, but we have a lot of work and I'd rather get back to work and focus on educational quality, some policy recommendations over what we feel is needed in our schools to to see for a better education for our students. And that proposal may address some of the things that have been on the table right now, but I think another conversation about what we should do is not wise. I think we need to move forward.
Thanks, Mike. Jeff?
So Megan, I took your invitation for a motion to heart, and I drafted something quickly here, and it's not going to be entirely accurate, but I tried to drop it in the chat, but the chat's turned off, so that I couldn't do that. But I'm happy to share it with folks. I think I agree that we have some critical people not here today, and that would be, I think, probably unwise for this group to move ahead without a larger, more robust representation of the entire commission. But I'll share it electronically and with you, Megan, and if you want to, I'll move it at the next meeting, or somebody can refine it if they want. But I do think that that's how boards operate, right? We operate by motion, and if we want to do something, we should move that and proceed ahead. And people can add to it. I didn't think to add extending our lifespan. Wasn't not what I was thinking today, but maybe that's something we should add to. So I'll share that with you, Megan, and then you can decide to share it with everybody or not.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. My practice has been to share everything so long as the person gives me permission. I really appreciate the conversation. I actually think this is one of the more substantive conversations we've had since maybe our guiding principle conversation. I am inclined to say, similar to what Mike just offered, that our next meeting is to pick our work back up. And Jeff, whether the commission, and I do agree, simply because I think even a vote will be stronger if everyone is here, regardless of how others vote. I still think it's stronger. But I think, let's surface it. That can still be part of next meeting, but whether we take a vote or not, I think it's clear from this conversation and from the fact that we're going to lean in on work that there are reservations. So I guess I'm just saying, regardless of whether or not it is an official motion and action on the opinion of the commission, whether it is or not, I still think we are going to lean into productive work to propose. And I guess it would be propose an alternative. So a couple of things just organizationally. The steering group has scheduled its meetings to be after these meetings, after the second meeting of the month. Mostly that's just an organizational structure. So the steering group, I'm not sure we will actually have a quorum of the steering group, but we will still have the meeting. So I'm not sure the group will be able to, take action. But for me, it's helpful just as an agenda planning meeting, if nothing else. So I think what I'm hearing is a March meeting that just picks up our work and leans into it. I think it should be recommendation focused. And that doesn't necessarily mean draft legislation, but that means conceptual recommendations. I still think it's useful just for the conversation to be organized. Maybe that's the trying to make sense of a conversation part of me, but I think that there's some usefulness in organizing them around the three areas, as long as we understand that they all intersect. So I'm happy to try to have the agenda such that we can dig into that on March 3rd. I think we have most of the time. We will be in person. We're in Lamoille South. So I think that we can have a pretty robust conversation. So I guess my thought is to wrap up this discussion by saying, it sounds like we're continuing to move on creating policy considerations, which is, I feel a little bit like I'm in the twilight zone, because we we originally organized our work in a way to do this, and now we're sort of coming back to it. And if the commission with more attendees in attendance chooses to take a motion, then that's something that we'll engage in. John.
Megan, I feel like we have more time today. Can we start to dig in right now and start to talk about, what our focus on governance might be, what our focus on funding might be? Again, I want to be respectful to the steering committee, but we do have a little bit of chunk of time here, and I think we can advance our work forward. And happy to roll up my sleeves and have that conversation.
I absolutely think we could. I don't even think it's that different than, our next agenda item would have been to discuss the charge of the commission. And I think organizing, I'm not sure I think that's in line with what our agenda is. So yes, I think we could use our time today. Mike.
I just have two questions for maybe you or somebody who's on the steering group to discuss. First of all, I think you mentioned at the beginning about a public engagement session in Lamoille County. I do want to point out too, and I'm sure my colleague John Castle will comment on this, that we did not do that for the NEK when we were in Newport, and I think that is a very large geographic region and has some unique pieces to it that we really should find a way to engage with that constituency as well as Lamoille in some way. I would not want to see us missing another engagement session with the county. So that's kind of one question or point of consideration for the steering group. And the other is, I remember that there were, when you talk about governance, there were two other proposed committees. And does the steering group or this body feel that we should be doing our work jointly at this point, or is there benefit to that structure? I just haven't heard any discussion about it before. So more questions than anything else.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing those up, Mike, because two things. One, we can certainly move to the added agenda item, which is let's talk about community engagement session, because if it's a yes, then I think we should do some work right now with what it also is going to look like, because I do think that I'm guessing that it would look a little bit different from the first ones, maybe not. So yes, I want to talk about that. And then to your point about subcommittees, this is kind of what I mean about the Twilight Zone. We organized ourselves that way because it is hard to have a 13-member discussion about each one of those things. And that is often how a body breaks up its work. It doesn't mean that any one subcommittee gets to make all the decisions. It's simply they are the ones that do the deep dive and they zoom back out. I think it was a structure developed with good intentions. I think whether the focus that ended up happening so heavily on the finance part of this, focused around short-term cost containment, also is related to why I think we went off track a little bit and why there was a desire to pull back and say, especially around finance, if we're making big recommendations, we should do that as a group. So I think that the steering group should have that conversation about whether or not it continues to think the work is best done as a group. I don't have an answer because I don't want to speak for them. They are the body of our collective that is meant to figure out how subcommittees work. So it's a strange piece of the law. That's all. Can we talk a minute about the engagement session? Are folks comfortable with that? Or does that make sense to do now and then use what time we have left to articulate? Okay. So Mike's exactly right. The only reason we suspended the February engagement session wasn't meant to be to skip over that region. It was because we had just signed the contract with the consulting firm who will help us do a frankly better job at engaging and having input sessions that are not even necessarily tied to our own meetings. And so with lots of good intentions, and their first body of work is to redo our engagement plan, which means they don't have a revised plan turned over. I think to your point, Mike, they already know from side conversations and from participating, at least virtually last month, that we are going to have to cycle back through some of these regions that we have not adequately heard from. So I do think they have that. That said, having an input session on Monday the 3rd makes, well, to me, it seems to make sense. I know that Lamoille is certainly prepared to host it. I guess what we need is sort of a signal that everyone agrees that that would be a good idea. And then I would love a few minutes to talk about what that should look like, because the communication and engagement subcommittee, the time that is pulling them back together isn't until after the 3rd. So thoughts on what an engagement session could and should look like? Peter, and then John.
Sorry, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm just going to create a problem.
That's okay.
I'm not sure what our timing is up there, but Monday, March 3rd is also an evening when many, many town meetings are being held.
That's fair. Actually,
and in terms of the NEK public engagement, it's unfortunate that we are trying to get up there. I just say we were very lucky we didn't have it, given the condition of the roads on the way home.
Also true.
Yeah,
John, do you want to go, or do you want to stick with that
I
part
was
of
going
it?
to bring up the same issue. I personally, right, as the chair of the Holland Elementary Board, we have our informational meeting that night. And I suspect there'll be other districts that have informational meetings that evening as well. So I agree. I think we should move forward with re-engaging our, community engagement opportunities. That may not be the best time just because of that potential conflict.
Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot that I was thinking about the same thing. Both of my previous districts and my current, where I live, all have informational meetings that night, which
And
is
I should
pretty
have thought of that
common,
as well,
I think.
because I should have thought of that as well, because we have one that night as well. So yes, thank you for bringing that up, Peter.
Yeah. Jennifer.
Would it make sense to change the March 3rd date to a different date? Just so that we can go to Lamoille and have the information or the engagement session on the same date?
Here are my thoughts in no particular order. While logically, that seems like a really no-brainer idea. A couple things. One, Lamoille has graciously volunteered more than once, and they already got bumped because we chose to meet, was it December? Whatever day that we either met in person or didn't. Anyway, in other words, they've already raised their hand for a couple months ago and then got booted. They've graciously held this date. I'm a little worried about kind of spoiling our welcome and not meeting on the 3rd, although I don't disagree that it's a bit of a conundrum. And it just opens up, I guess the 17th is our next meeting. We could ask them, and I hesitate to say that even as I say it out loud, we could ask them if they could host us on the 17th instead. That's a school day, so it becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of hosting. And the 17th is also the day that our communication partners will present their revised engagement plan. So we already have a chunk of our agenda.
May I respond to that?
Yep.
Thanks. So my two thoughts with that is, yes, it seems clear that they want to have us up there, but it might feel like a hollow victory if we come up there but don't have a public engagement session. It might be the reason why they are so keen to have us come is so that we can engage with the public. So I think that's a question worth asking. Are they stuck on the date, or is it really what's motivating them is that they want that opportunity for public engagement? And then the second thing is, I think, although, maybe a little bit trickier, it is possible to switch the date of that meeting to a different day that week. If we had it on that Thursday, that would not conflict with town meeting, and I'm just saying we don't necessarily just have to bump it to March 17th. But I don't know. I realize it's always tricky when we start inserting different dates with our planning.
Yeah, my immediate reaction, and I don't mean to be, it's not really just about me, but I can tell you that I would have trouble picking a different date between now and the 17th. Like, I know I couldn't do that Thursday. that's just me. And so therefore that is probably true of lots of others of us. So I just worry about, I worry about canceling meetings. We've just created a sense of urgency about our work right now. And we would be saying, oh, but we won't meet. And even though it was really hard to pull a steering group meeting today, it's really hard to get folks to take time out of their busy schedules to give, right? I just think, I don't know. I think that we agreed on the cadence and I think that we should stick with it. I am sensitive to the not having an input session. I just think we have to be really clear then that we have missed regions. And so therefore our engagement plan needs to start or kick off with those regions is my sense. I don't know. I am hesitant to try to reschedule because being the one involved in the wrangling, it's really hard to reschedule. I think we would end up with a meeting really close to the 17th anyway. Open to other thoughts, but that's my.
So just to be clear, we have a meeting on the 3rd and we have a meeting on the 17th.
Yes.
The 3rd was supposed to be in that county, but we can't hold a community session because of things like communities having info meetings and things like that.
Yep.
But we could on the 17th. So is it really just a matter of asking that county if they can switch their meeting to be the 17th rather than finding another meeting date? Is that, I'm unclear.
That I could ask them. I'm signaling reservation about whether or not they'll be able to do that, but I can certainly ask them that question so that we would still
Right.
meet on the 3rd, but virtually, and then we would meet on the 17th. I can definitely
That's why I'm
ask.
just thinking I was just thinking the cadence of the meetings would still be intact in that manner. And we all have that already on our schedules. It'd just be a matter of, traveling to Lamoille in person on the 17th instead of the 3rd.
Yep. I can say right now, I'm happy to reach out to Lamoille after this meeting and find out if that would be workable for them. If it's not, I'm inclined to keep it out of respect to them and volunteering, but Jay, you had your hand up, maybe.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I keep getting messages. My internet's unstable. So a lot of cartoons in the next room over on streaming TV, evidently. Just wanted to say on the 17th, I've got my executive council meeting during the day. That's, scheduled a year in advance. So I won't be able to miss that. I could drive to Lamoille that night still though, but I'm definitely available on March 3rd. If we have a communication thing, I'd be more than willing to go there if they don't want to change, as long as we're going to make sure we have enough people to go to meet the needs of the folks in Lamoille.
I think where we are is I am going to reach out to Lamoille to see if they could switch and be hosting us on the 17th instead of the 3rd. If the answer is no, then I think we are keeping it and going to Lamoille during the day on the 3rd, not having an input session, and making it really clear for our consultants that we have multiple counties that we need to pretty quickly circle back around to. John.
Is there any merit in looking at the 10th? I understand it's always hard to reschedule meetings, but the reality is, our virtual meetings, our morning meetings, our in-person meetings, right, are afternoon meetings. So if we were to move the 3rd to the 10th, but keep it an afternoon, we would, look at an evening, engagement. Again, obviously that's contingent upon this group having availability, but also whether Lamoille South has the ability to host us on that evening.
I can ask them. I would need someone to stand in for me because I'm not available with the 10th. I don't know if that's true of everyone else, but once the cadence is established, I schedule things on other dates. And again, that's fine. I would just need someone to run the meeting, maybe a member of the steering group. So I can check with the steering group on that. When I ask Lamoille, I'll ask them about the 3rd, the 10th, and the 17th. But that's my reservation, is if anytime we reschedule, some people can't make it, some people can, which is also true during our cadence. So I get it. So I will open the question to the 10th. The other reality, this is going to sound a little bit like I'm finger wagging at ourselves, which I don't mean to do. It takes me a long time just to get responses from folks about their availability to change a meeting. And so if we wait a whole week, then we're sending out a cancellation notice anyway. I'm just sort of saying that makes it hard. It makes it hard to change. It's 10:35. We still have 20 minutes because I think we're at least settled on the next steps related to the input session. I think we do have a few minutes to start to pull out basically policy considerations under each of the three areas. Jeff, you might be the first to start that conversation, or you might have something else before we switch.
No, I'm continuing the conversation about scheduling. I was looking at my schedule, trying to find some things and having trouble there. But so I think, I hear you, Megan, that rescheduling this might be really tough. So I vote we stick with it. And then there at that meeting, maybe Peter suggested there may be an adjustment in our schedule anyway from the legislature. So it may give us more time in which to go around the state and meet in various counties. So I think rescheduling may be tough, and I hear you there. So it's on our schedule. I think what you're suggesting is we should keep it. I think. I tend to agree.
Yeah, I probably stopped short of saying it that concretely. I have a lot of reservations about trying to reschedule it, but I'm willing to ask about the 10th and the 17th, as I said. But I'm more likely to feel comfortable with keeping the 3rd and the 17th. Switching the location or flipping the format of the meeting if we can. I think that's reasonable. So I will.
Okay, thanks.
I will know more about that once I hear from Lamoille.
Maybe there's a good Irish pub on the 17th that we could host it in, right?
If we are not on school property and offered some beverages, I'm sure we would get plenty of people to join us.
Isn't it a national holiday?
St. Patty's Day, right?
It's a national holiday, John.
All right. Do folks have some energy for sort of a... I'm not sure if we're continuing down the policy considerations under the funding hood or if we want to open it up. John.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd be very interested in hearing from the group, I think there's this debate about what do we focus on first? We focus on funding or focus on governance. And I think we've had, people suggest one or the other. And I don't know that there's a complete right or wrong. And some of that's maybe strategic. Some of it just maybe disposition that we have or lens that we have. But I think it would be important maybe to start there. And then, once we can sort of just decide what our priority is, then maybe dig in a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, one of the things that I heard even in today's conversation is that it's really difficult to think about a different funding system if the funding system is being modeled on a governance structure that either doesn't exist yet or shouldn't exist, or even modeling against our current if we think our current is not sufficient is not a good idea. Those tip the scales towards this idea that centering some conversations around governance is probably useful. It doesn't, I'm envisioning as we have these conversations that there are giant parking lots under the other areas. And as we're talking about governance, we may be throwing things onto those other areas, but what do others think? This would be starting to think a little bit about governance.
Whoops, I didn't raise my hand.
It's okay. Go ahead, Jay, and then Peter.
I'm struggling with the technology here. I tried to put something in chat too, and it's just not working. I think without governance, we have nothing else. So I'll just say that one more time. I don't see how we can make big systemic changes without addressing governance.
Thanks. Peter, and then Mike?
Legislatively, we've got a divided task here. The Education Committee is dealing with governance and policy. Ways and Means is dealing with foundation formula and other finance issues. So we're kind of moving on a dual track at the same time. However, I would say that the foundation formula discussion is largely based on data and information, and is a little less tricky, I guess, in a sense, than governance, whereas governance brings in a host of significant issues that are really challenging that we don't quite have a sense of how to navigate. Just the idea of saying no more SUs, only SDs, but when you have a mixed delivery SU, some tuitioning, some hybrid, some full on K-12, how do you bring that together in a way that is, I guess, legal, among other things? So in my own selfish way, I'd put in a plug for governance, but just to say that there's nobody here representing the other committees that are dealing with finance to say it would be better to have information on finance. But that's for my opinion. I think that the finance portion of it is very data driven, very numbers driven, whereas governance a little trickier. So it might be helpful to start there.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Mike?
And I was just pulling up the authorizing legislation and just taking a look at it from that lens. The first thing referenced after discussion of public engagement is policy considerations in developing its recommendations. The commission shall consider and prioritize the following topics. And it says prioritize. And A is governance, resources, administration. So I think there's some logical reasons to start with governance that both Peter and Peter mentioned, but I also think that from looking at it from the legislative lens, I think governance makes a lot of sense as well.
Thanks, Mike. I want to come, I don't actually know who is on the phone. Someone on the phone has their hand raised.
Yeah, that's Oliver. Sorry. I'm just coming back from a dentist appointment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay enough.
Okay. So I'll agree. I just want to echo Jay's point about governance. I think we need, everything flows from governance, and I think we really need to start there before diving into anything around the financing.
Perfect. Did I think we caught you, sort of a nod toward acknowledging that governance is pretty critical.
Yes.
Perfect. A question that this makes me think of, because I agree. I think that both from what's written in the law and also what we're talking about, I wonder if folks have thoughts or ideas about either information that should be distributed to the commission in advance of the third, like what will prep us best for this conversation? I know there have been a couple of useful presentations in House Ed around just governance, meaning how do other states govern themselves? I don't know to what extent there's some background information that might be helpful that we could push out to the commission in advance. So that's my question to you all.
I wonder if it would be helpful just as a point of reference for all of us to be able to have some kind of map that shows currently what is the governance structure, because not everybody knows where every single school district borders are. So are they an SU? Are they an SD? Where are they? And then, and if there's multiple districts in an SU, kind of outlining, with a bolder line around those, basically to say that's an SU, but it's all these districts inside. And then kind of to what Mike was saying, that there's certain SUs that have kind of a reason why they're an SU still, that there's a complication in how they are structured individually and whether they're tuitioning, students to another location, some kind of information on which school districts or supervisory unions are doing that. And maybe what their reason is for being an SU versus an SD. Is it logistic or is it more related to how they have to deliver education?
Great, thank you. Jennifer.
So to Elizabeth's point, Zoe and Jill Briggs Campbell were testifying before Senate Ed sometime in the last week. It's all a blur. But they were asked to come up with maps that I think are getting exactly at what we're asking for. So I think it would be helpful maybe to follow up with the agency and have them share those maps with us.
Great. Peter?
Yeah, we also have some mapping going on as well that might be able to help. However, I sort of look at the assembled group here plus the other commission members, and basically it's a lot of people with a lot of experience in Vermont who know the lay of the land, who know the issues. So I do sort of wonder about sort of delaying a good, robust conversation while we await data and information when, frankly, I believe all of you are the right people to just sort of start the conversation, because you know the exceptions, you know the problem areas, and you know the unique and mixed delivery that we have going on. So I would just say, I'm not sure that this group isn't completely ready to have the conversation right now.
Yeah, if I could just respond real quickly to that. I agree. You actually just said what I stopped short of saying when I asked the question. Part of asking it is so that we don't waste time at the meeting. I shouldn't say waste. Why we don't spend time at the meeting saying, what are the list of things we want? And then we wait another meeting to get them. That's what I'm trying to avoid. So if there is any way, especially things that just already exist, to send to us. And I'm also sensitive to that same logic was also used early on in the steering group's conversations around the need for financial consultants and modeling sort of this, the steering group, which I was part of those meetings, saying, look, we have a lot of this information at our fingertips, and that comment and decision has come back and been used sort of against the commission to say, well, you decided not to get this information, so we did. I might be making a parallel between these two things that is not an appropriate parallel, but I think I agree. I would rather us get down to some robust conversations about making proposals. Along the way, we might identify pieces of information that we would need in order to thoroughly vet any of those recommendations, but I think that would be useful. John.
I think part of this is we have to identify what is our goal around looking at governance, right? How much of this is a financial consideration? How much of it is a operating system and quality and management of our learning environments? And it can be both or multiple things. I'm not saying it's exclusively one or the other, but I think we want to sort of parse that out and talk about that. I also think there is definitely a need for data, right? And so there's data about the operation of SDs versus SUs. I'm always at the risk of being sort of the quintessential contrarian, but I'm not convinced supervisory unions are less effective than SDs. I think it depends, right? There are a lot of variables, and before we sort of charge full ahead to say, bottom line, everything has to be an SD, I think we need to really analyze that. And this goes back to some things that I said in the very beginning of our work, is that without an analysis of Act 46, right? What is this pros and cons and what transpired? I mean, that's the last time we had any major change in governance. Not necessarily trying to prove one or the other, but I think it's worthy of some analysis. There hasn't been anything really conclusively done. We have a Yale student that's done some work around things, but other than that, I think it may be worthy of us asking for some additional analysis that is not done by the administration, right? I feel like that's something that has to be done independently. So I think, this is an important work. I think we have to be really sort of have our eyes wide open, that we have to be careful about how much we can project we can save with district consolidation. I think there's some limitations to that. I think there's certainly some opportunities that we need to look at, but I think we also have to be realistic.
Thanks, John. I actually really like the question you started that with, which is what are we trying to achieve with changes? Because I know from speaking just for myself, when I think of things that get in the way of us providing good instruction for kids, it's less about saving, it's less about cost savings. I actually think that they could result. But for me, when I think about governance, it's not actually about cost savings. So I just like that question to frame how we kick off. And I also, that helps us make better recommendations, because if our look at governance, scale, things like that are about achieving a certain end, then it helps us know what would we need to study. And so Jennifer, and then Elizabeth, and then I'm probably going to wrap us up so that we have some time for public comment.
Thanks. So I'm just thinking, we all wear different hats here. So I have my personal hat, which I'm happy to talk about, but I also, on behalf of the State Board of Ed, to the extent that the state board's position on any of these questions is relevant. Again, we've got a meeting coming up on Wednesday. I'm happy to have a conversation with the board about governance and, bring this back to the commission, but I'm not really clear on what the charge is to be able to communicate that back to the board. So I don't know if we've got, something pithy that I can sort of center a conversation around, but just wanted to put that out there because I think it would be helpful to get board feedback, but I have to be able to do that in time to have a discussion on Wednesday.
Elizabeth, you go first, then I'll.
I just wanted to kind of reiterate something that you touched upon, Megan, in regards to when we talk about any kind of consolidation amongst districts. Sometimes it seems like the focus is always on the efficiency you can gain from having the governance itself be consolidated. And maybe that's a cost saver. But for me, thinking about like even my local little district, that's beside other small districts like Mount Abraham and Middlebury, those districts, we have tried for years to try to collaborate on things like if we can't offer French at our school, but they offer French and we offer German, can we transport kids between the two and try to come? So there are ways that we would be able to deliver more for our students and give them more offerings by being consolidated with our neighbors. And it's been very difficult to kind of actually make that happen because of the governance structure, because of master agreements, because of disalignment of scheduling, all of those things, or even grading systems being slightly different within schools. So I think that oftentimes the conversation goes to how much you can save, but that's not really the end goal. It's being able to offer more to students with the buildings that we have, because like you said, sometimes you can't consolidate and actually bring all those kids into one building. The buildings just aren't big enough. But sometimes it's more about being able to offer more and kind of, send kids to different spots to get the education.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So I think the two potential prompting questions are, and they're nested questions, but under the guise of governance for the moment, what are the things that we would be looking to change and why for governance? And what are the things that are getting in the way of whatever it is we're trying to achieve, which is kind of like John's question and your question, Elizabeth, because those two things together will point towards not only some recommendations, but also what else do we need to know? What other information is missing? So I think that's super helpful. Jennifer, I think the question about I think at the steering committee meeting in a few minutes, it's just going to be us digesting this conversation as input to what our potential charge is. And it could be our charge is not that different from here's how we're approaching our work memo that we just put out. And for benefit of the commission. The steering group is just looking to help the legislature know how to use us, and if and give them some of that, and anything that they craft is coming to the commission to weigh in on. So we're looking to create a starting point.
Can I?
Jennifer, is that a real hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, it is a real hand. Thanks. So, and just to kind of pick up on what John was saying, and also I'm hearkening back to State Board of Ed special meeting on February 3rd, where it was our student member who brought up the point, as we're thinking about change, that another thing to think about is, what are we losing? What are we giving up by changing? So I think that's a really important thing to think about too, as we're considering all these different options.
Great. Okay, with that, we are on time according to our agenda, but there is an opportunity for members of the public to speak if they would like. So if you would like to make a comment, you can raise your hand. I'm going to start with you, Alan. We only have a few minutes left, but if other hands go up, we will let them speak as well. Go ahead, Alan.
So I've sort of been focused in the last week, and you talked this morning about the Scott administration state guarantee funding plan. And I'm really concerned that the plan would actually crush the equity that Brigham was able to provide. I think it would have devastating impacts on the 2 of the 5 districts that are supposedly being helped by the peanut-sized assistance the state will give the towns with the least district wealth per pupil. The Northeast Kingdom especially will suffer, although pockets within that district will probably be fine. I'm thinking particularly of St. Johnsbury, where St. J. Academy will likely be untouched as an independent school. The administration's funding plan to me looks more like a concerted effort to further divide the haves from the have-nots in Vermont, rather than an effort to help everyone. Because of the years of increased property tax disparity since the time of the last foundation formula, the administration's state guarantee plan might actually be worse than that formula was. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Mary Gannon.
My internet's also been choppy. Can folks hear me? Okay, great. I'll just be very quick, Megan. Thank you. I just want to, I've been in and out of these meetings, as many of you know. This was one of the most substantive and authentic conversations of this group that I have witnessed. And so I just want to applaud your courage to maybe think outside the box more, this idea of really taking a position and a stand with the governor, saying that this is not a proposal that you could get behind, wherever that falls out. But just putting some of that on the table really energized me. And I want to appreciate, Jay said a few times, and a couple of you as well, that if we really are thinking about the impact on children and kids, and to keep centering those who will be most impacted, which is our children. Because my feeling has been over the years, and I've been in the Vermont education work since the late 90s, and the Agency of Education has not functioned for kids, teachers, and schools. It really just has not do that. So I want to encourage you to keep, moving forward, stay strong, and you have an opportunity here. And I think the public, will really have your back and applaud you if you can begin to think a little bit more outside of this box that the governor has handed us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any other comments? Okay. I just would also thank you, commission members, for a really important conversation. I'm leaving feeling energized. I don't really have a good sense of how to organize our conversation moving forward, but I do feel good about where we're headed. So Jennifer and Peter, you are it. I think for respect of the fact that we posted a meeting, I think we should log in at 11:15. We will not have a quorum. And so I think we should say that out loud. we could still have an informal conversation so that you can inform the agenda that I put out. So that would be my recommendation, is that we go ahead and log in at 11:15 if that's okay.
All right. I want to acknowledge Megan. You have an almost impossible task. And I don't know about everyone else on the Zoom call, but I'm really grateful that you are the one who's been tasked to serve as chair. I realize it's a lot of work. It's not clear. And I just wanted to publicly appreciate you sort of trying to swallow the ocean here. So thank you.
Thank you. I do appreciate that, and also would welcome thoughts and ideas, because I'm sure there's ways to organize ourselves better, but so I appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see two of you in a few minutes.